A year after Keir Starmer took office as chairman, the party is bobbing about. A fatal development in view of the increasing authoritarianism in Great Britain. From 100 to 0 in 12 months. From 2015 to 2020, under the chairmanship of Jeremy Corbyn, Labour was a party that promised major economic and social change, from the nationalisation of a number of industries to free internet for all. Today, however, the Labour leadership can hardly bring itself to support a tax hike for large corporations, a proposal by the Tories, by the way. When the current leader of the party, Keir Starmer, ran for chairmanship a year ago, he promised the continuation of the Corbyn era. He said he would uphold Labour's radical values and bring the party together. The base, which had grown to around 500,000 members under Corbyn's chairmanship, was obviously convinced. His victory over the two challengers, including Rebecca Long-Bailey from the left wing, was overwhelming. Gaya Sriskantan didn't vote for Starmer at the time, but she was open-minded. She says, he said many things that we liked and he made concessions to the left. We were open to working with him. Sriskantan, 43 years old and active in the solar energy sector, joined Labour in 2016 and said, my story is quite typical. I saw in Corbyn a principled politician who was always on the right side in his career and with whom I could identify. Well, I'll comment on that later. She soon became active and joined the Momentum organization, which saw itself as the base campaign for the Corbyn project. Even after Labour's severe election defeat in December 2019, she did not give up. Sriskantan has been co-chair of the management board of Momentum since May 2020. The initial confidence that Starmer would build on the previous 4 years soon fizzled out. Within a few months, we saw a complete U-turn, says Sriskantan. Left-wing members of the shadow cabinet were shot, not literally, and in October, Starmer suspended his predecessors from the party after Corbyn's tepid reaction to the Equality and Human Rights Commission's report on anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. The Commission had sharply criticized the party for not dealing with anti-Semitic incidents with the necessary care and urgency. That was very unusual, says Sriskantan. It doesn't often happen that a party throws the resigned chairman out after 6 months. And it got even worse for the left-wing members. The party leadership decreed that the local Labour associations were not allowed to debate the suspension. Some did it anyway, and were also kicked out of the party. The atmosphere inside Labour is currently poisoned, says Sriskantan. Part of Momentum's work is to help suspended members regain their party membership. In many cases, they were successful because often the expulsion seems to have occurred on a legally dubious basis, she said. With the left wing cold, Labour also loses contact with the social movements. The party is increasingly limited to politicizing in Westminster. While his predecessor had always sought to build a bridge to the social and workers' movements, Starmer feels much more comfortable in the conventional political scene, exchanging blows in the lower house or in the television studio of the BBC. Last summer, he distanced himself from the Black Lives Matter demos, and when the teachers' union threatened a strike in February because they believed it was dangerous to return to the classroom early, Starmer said, a strike would be wrong. The community organizing unit founded under Corbyn, with which the party tried to anchor Labour more firmly in society, has been dissolved. That would all be less bad if Labour would at least meet with growing support from the electorate. But that's exactly the catch. The party's polls are lousy, despite the government's countless missteps in fighting the pandemic and the appalling death toll. The opposition barely managed to catch up with the Tories last year. However, the start of the successful vaccination program has boosted the government's popularity, and the opposition has fallen far behind. According to a recent survey, the ruling party has a lead of around 10 percentage points. The problems started in September, says James Medway. As an advisor to Shadow Finance Minister John McDonnell from 2015 to 2019, the 41-year-old economist was a defining figure in Corbynomics, the economic policy strategy of the left Labour wing. Starmer insisted that the corona crisis would remain a short, sharp shock. That may have been an understandable assumption at first, but it's now clear that the pandemic won't go away anytime soon. Labour has not yet come to terms with this fact, says Medway. The Tories, on the other hand, did. They saw a political opportunity and turned away from the earlier focus on austerity measures. They speak of major investments in the north of England, of a green industrial revolution. Paradoxically, these demands show the real success of Corbyn. He was able to shift the economic consensus to the left. That's what his people think. There's currently broad acceptance for the idea that the state should intervene more in the economy, says Medway. In early March, Finance Minister Rishi Sunak announced a rise in corporate tax from 19 to 25% to finance some of the state spending. Starmer initially said that now is not the time to raise taxes. Only after strong pressure from his own party did he speak out in favor of a gradual increase so as not to let the Tories overtake him on the left. How much money the government will actually spend, and for what, is another question. But if Starmer is still pretending that Labour's most important task is fighting the Tories' austerity program, Medway says he's ignoring the real issue. Instead, the opposition should shift its focus to the government's increasingly repressive policies. The real danger comes from growing state authoritarianism that was already evident before the corona crisis. Since then, this tendency has increased. This can be seen, for example, in new laws that are intended to protect undercover agents and British soldiers deployed abroad from criminal prosecution, or in the treatment of refugees, hundreds of whom are locked up in former barracks, under conditions that Amnesty International describes as completely unreasonable. Or also in the instruction from the Ministry of Education in the fall that no anti-capitalist material should be taught in schools because this expresses an extreme political stance. The Labour leadership has little to say on these issues, and opposition to the bills was minimal. Medway says this growing authoritarianism is the most pressing political issue right now, and Labour must do something about it. We must base our opposition on defending civil liberties and democracy, the right to protest, to contradict, to speak freely. That must be our political focus. And this raises the question of what options the party still has left to influence the leadership. Sriskanth and her colleagues rely on the strategy of the Corbyn years, involvement of the grassroots. On the one hand, this happens within the party structures. She says, we fight at every level for the representation of socialist ideas. And compared to 2015, when Corbyn took office, the left is in a far better position. It is well represented in the local party associations and can have a say in the selection of candidates for local councils or national elections. According to Sriskanth, Momentum still has tens of thousands of members. A large number of the almost 500,000 party members are left of centre. A second focus is the cooperation with existing campaigns and organizations outside of Labour, unions, anti-racism and civil rights groups. I have my own thoughts about unions, but okay. During the pandemic, for example, we supported the fight by tenants associations that protested against evictions, says Sriskanth. We want to get involved in all areas which wage earners fight for better working and living conditions. Momentum also attaches great importance to political education. That was one of the weaknesses of the past few years. She says we were really good at mobilizing people for elections and demos, but the ideas of the party leadership were not so well anchored in the minds of the members that they fought for them themselves, even without a leader. I'm thinking of ideas such as democratic ownership of companies, the 4-day week, or strategies of anti-racism, she says. Particular attention is currently paid to the police law, which the government is cramming through Parliament. It is the latest step on the authoritarian path. The Interior Ministry wants to give the police more powers to prevent peaceful protests, for example, if they are too loud. In an open letter, over 100 civil rights organizations warned that the bill was an attack on our fundamental rights as citizens. Many people are not aware of the serious consequences this law will have, says Sueddeutsche. The protests against the bill have already had an effect. First, the Labour group wanted to abstain from the corresponding lower house vote, but after public outrage over the police's brutal crackdown on a vigil following a femicide in London, Starmer announced that Labour would vote against it. Because of the large Tory majority, Labour will not be able to stop the law on its own. But Starmer's U-turn is an important signal. The Labour leadership changed its position because public opinion forced it to do so, says James Medway. That will be an important part of the left strategy. Starmer is like a weather vane. If public opinion blows in a certain direction, Labour will have to adapt. And there I agree with Medway, and I agree with Labour in one point. Civil rights is the thing you have to watch as opposition now. And the whole authoritarianism thing as well. The rest of the policies Sueddeutsche named would even put them far away. Labour is supposed to be like the German Social Democrats when we compare parties from the other countries. But the policies, the left of Labour, which is really strong, is always bringing up, is like the Linke, that's the left party here, that's the former ruling party of the German Democratic Republic. So there you see how far left that goes. So this is, from my taste, far too left even with all the thing I cited here today. I quoted her, so that's why I brought it, but I do not agree with any of this. The state shouldn't interfere more with private, lacking a word when I'm not scripting it. That's why I script so much, just as an explanation, because since I'm not living in the UK anymore, and this is quite some time ago now, I'm speaking German all day, and the language you speak, after some time you think in that language. When I was living in the UK, I thought in English. But now I have to search for words a lot of times, and so that happens. No, but what you own, the state should not interfere with, except there's absolute necessity. The same with the economy. The state should set some basic rules for economy, but within it, inside this corset of rules, that the economy should act on its own. And I'm, in the German sense of the word, I'm a liberal conservative. So freedom of the people, the liberty of the people to express themselves, to live the way they want to live, without any unnecessary interference by the state, that is something I agree with. And that fits in my picture as well. But all this I heard here today from Sueddeutsche is going to the far, far left when you have a look from the outside, from Germany, on the whole thing. And so I would never agree with any of that except the protection of civil rights things. But I know some of my German viewers, for example, don't agree with me on many political things here in Germany. But that's the nice thing, that you have the freedom of opinion, the freedom of expression. You can say whatever you want as long as it doesn't violate other people's rights. And that's what we have to fight for, not a state that wants to tell us what we can think, what we can say, what we can sing. If you have seen my video about the lyrics used in court, you will know what I mean. And freedom is the word here. and to hand over freedom from allegedly bureaucratic dictatorship monster to see your own country turned more and more into an authoritarian state. Is that what you wanted? Well, it's just a question in one direction. But if you still want to be informed, please subscribe to my channel. Auf Wiedersehen.